Hey guys, Grandy Tamias here, and welcome to my full, spoiler-filled review for Jurassic World Rebirth. Boy, it's hard to find a place to start because I have a lot to say, as evident from the runtime. There are still some bad points, but I'm very confident in saying that despite the negative reception that this film has been receiving, Rebirth is better than Fallen Kingdom, Dominion, and in my personal opinion, Jurassic Park 3. Again, not that that film is particularly that bad. Jurassic World 1, not sure. I have a lot of nostalgia for that movie, but Rebirth still pays respect to Jurassic Park 1 and The Lost World, with how its characters develop as they travel across a dinosaur-infested island. Jurassic Park 3 may have had that too, but the difference is that the protagonists in Rebirth aren't instantly unlikable or make dumb decisions the way that Amanda Kirby did. I know she meant well, but bringing a megaphone to a, again, dinosaur-infested island and tricking Dr. Grant, Billy, and several mercenaries to go there and not planning to pay them is more than a little off-putting. And yes, there is a scumbag who wants to make off with dino DNA, just like Dennis Nedry, Eli Mills, and Lewis Dodson, but I think Martin Krebs was done better than the latter two of those characters I mentioned. Yeah, Eli Mills killed Benjamin Lockwood, but it was off-screen, and the way the movie sets up the confrontation of Krebs being revealed as a liar and wanting to let Teresa die really made me love to hate him. But of course, it was predictable that he was going to die, as were the deaths of several other fodder characters, like the soldier guy and the deckhand lady who got eaten by Spinosaurs, and the mechanic who got swallowed by the Quetzalcoatlus. Though one death, or set of deaths, that I didn't predict was the helicopter crew that got killed by the Distortus Rex. I thought the protagonists were going to miss the 2-minute window to get their attention since I knew that they were going to have to use the boat anyway. But the movie pulled a clever reversal by having the D-Rex snatch the helicopter from behind some clouds. Also, is it just me, or did the D-Rex look larger, almost Muto-sized, when it grabbed and bit the helicopter, compared to later when it eats Krebs? Oh, and the way it ate him reminded me of the Rancor eating the Gamorrean guard in Return of the Jedi. I'll get back to the humans later, but I gotta talk more about the D-Rex. I'm surprised that it actually survived the movie, as the last 3 installments had dinosaurs that were framed as being villains who were there to be killed. And it would have felt thematic to kill off the D-Rex, since it caused the island to become abandoned in the first place. But no, the movie had the restraint to kill off what, for all intents and purposes, was a monster that deserved to die. Okay, maybe deserving to die is a bit strong. At the end of the day, it is just an animal, but in terms of its presence as a force of nature, it is what the Dominion Giganotosaurus should have been. I would have been fine if the Giganotosaurus had survived after having its ass handed to it by Rexy, because it really didn't deserve the unsatisfying death that it got. And the D-Rex is also hard to blame since none of the humans that it killed were ones that both didn't deserve it and were important enough to care about. Then again, very few human characters are like that in the franchise. The only ones that I can think of who tick both of those boxes would be Eddie Carr, Robert Muldoon, Ray Arnold, and maybe Roland's friend Ajay, but that's really only if you cared about him from that deleted scene, and his death wasn't even on screen anyway. He was just killed off during the long grass scene, and we only found out about it from Roland afterwards. And notice how all those characters were from the first 2 films. Had Jurassic Park 3 killed Billy Brennan like an earlier version of that film had planned, he would have ticked both of those boxes too because, while he did attempt to steal some raptor eggs, he was redeemed when he saved Eric Kirby. But as for the human characters in Rebirth that we're supposed to care about, Scarlett Johansson knocked it out of the park as Zora Bennett, as I knew she would. Zora is a mercenary/paramilitary type, and I know they don't explore that much beyond some expository dialogue, but this is par for the course in the Jurassic films, and I feel like we'd all be complaining about not having as much dinosaur focus if they did flesh out these backstories more. Same goes for Duncan Kincaid, who I also thought was well done as a character for what he was. And the scene where he had a fake-out death actually had me on the edge of my seat. And it was actually foreshadowed earlier in the movie when Duncan said that he wouldn't die in a jungle. I thought that they were going to have him be killed off and that his sacrifice would mean something, but at the same time, I can give this film a pass for wanting to go with a happy ending, especially since the rest of the climax had no other victory moment like the death of the villain dinosaur. That, and I think that the movie wanted to avoid the stigma that the first 3 Jurassic Park films had of killing the black guy. Jonathan Bailey's character, Henry Loomis, I felt was the most relatable to me, being the nerdy type, And much like Ian Malcolm, everything Loomis says is right about mankind's hubris. Our intelligence has made us arrogant enough to wipe ourselves out, even though we've existed for a lot less time than the dinosaurs did. And that science should be for all of us, instead of letting corporations and governments control who gets healthcare based on affordability. And the Delgado family I thought was alright. Yeah, it's predictable that all of these movies are going to have a child character in an attempt to appeal to kids who love dinosaurs, but most Marvel, Star Wars, or Transformers movies don't have main or supporting characters who are children, and yet children still watch those. Chaos Theory definitely made the right call by aging up the campers. I'm guessing because the Delgado mother is absent, she's divorced from the family, which... why? Why do all the Jurassic movies other than Fallen Kingdom have to mention or imply divorce? Oh, and the boyfriend character, Xavier. At the second showing I went to, several people in the audience laughed whenever he made any sort of joke or quippy remark, like when he said that the view of the jungle was like looking at a deathbed. The joke about him smoking a plant that is less than legal in most states of the US, and the part where he had to stop peeing to not alert a mutodon that was right behind him. I'll get back to that later. Heck, even jokes about him people laughed at, like when Teresa was trying to convince her dad that Xavier isn't all bad because she sees a different side to him, and then Isabella responds, the naked side. Again, why? Nobody needed to know that. Heck, she shouldn't even know that. Okay, that's enough of the human characters. Let's move on to the plot and timeline. So, the text at the beginning of the movie says that it's been 32 years since dinosaurs returned, which is technically inaccurate. If they're referring to the events of the first Jurassic Park in 1993, that was 32 years ago, assuming that the movie takes place in its release year of 2025. But we know definitively from what's shown on screen in Dominion that InGen in the film canon had been cloning dinosaurs since at least 1986, with Microceratus. So it should be 39 years, but then again, neither the cloning nor the events of 93 were public knowledge until years after with the T-Rex incident in San Diego. So, that aside, and again, assuming the movie is set in 2025, we're told that the incident with the D-Rex on Ile Saint-Hubert took place 17 years ago, which would put it in 2008. Now, even though in the trailer Zora says that the island was the research facility for the original Jurassic Park, we know that is not the case because A, Isla Sorna, and B, it wouldn't make sense because 2008 is long after the 1993 incident. Not to mention, the purpose of the island was to test away from the theme park. So I believe that they were actually referring to Jurassic World, not Jurassic Park. Which would make sense because, canonically, that park opened in 2005, and since Krebs says that the park wanted a mutant dinosaur that was scarier, had more teeth, or something along those lines, that implies that the D-Rex may have been an early prototype for the Indominus Rex. But after the 2008 incident on Ile Saint-Hubert, InGen moved its hybrid dinosaur research to their main genetics facility on Isla Nublar, where Dr. Wu would make the Scorpius Rex, and later the Indominus Rex in 2012. But it's interesting to think that, as early as 2008, 3 years into Jurassic World's lifespan, they wanted hybrid dinosaurs to boost sales. And while never mentioned in the film, we can assume Masrani Global was involved, since at the time, InGen was a subsidiary of theirs. This would also explain the presence of the Mosasaurus, as the Rebirth one may have been a prototype for the Jurassic World version. Why they went with a scaly and less cool version, I have no idea. Either Loomis or Krebs also says that the worst of the worst dinosaurs were left on Hubert because they were too dangerous for the park, which could imply that it was a dumping ground for the bad-tempered ones. But it also likely explains why they never brought over the new Spinosaurus. Or maybe they did and we just never saw it, since supplementary material for Fallen Kingdom suggests that Spinosaurus died out on the island, even though the JP3 variety still existed, as shown in Camp Cretaceous on the Manticore Island. The Quetzalcoatlus was also likely too dangerous, and I'll talk more about that variation later. But the Titanosaurus, not so much, so I'm going to assume that the reason they weren't brought over to Nublar was because they were created not long before the D-Rex incident, so they didn't have time to transport them. And the Velociraptors, I can understand those being too dangerous, and they probably wanted a version that could more easily be tamed, and even then, they weren't fit for public display. An interesting bit of note is that Loomis says that each asset was worth, on average, $72 million, yet in Jurassic World, Simon Masrani says that the Indominus Rex had $26 million invested in it. Not sure if that was referring to the Verizon wireless deal or the cost of engineering the creature, but if it's the latter, I guess InGen found ways of cutting costs after the D-Rex incident. Probably by not bothering to fix the genes that would have made it less dangerous. Although I kind of think that dumping the $72 million assets on an island is almost as bad of an idea as simply killing them, since on the island, many of the species could kill each other or die of natural causes. So that's my timeline justification theory for why Ile Saint-Hubert and its species exist.
More or less.
But what about the dinosaurs dying out on the mainland? I partially answered that in the preconceptions video with the comparison to the Asian giant hornets, but I think this deserves a deeper explanation. I found this quote from writer David Koepp saying that he didn't have a single idea how to continue the previous film's plotline of dinosaurs living in our environment and wanted a story about us back in theirs. As well as thinking the previous films, quote, took that idea all the way. Look, I'm not a writer, so it would probably take me a long time to brainstorm a decent story idea that continues that plotline, but I know it's possible. Considering one of the biggest complaints about Dominion was that it didn't show enough of the effect that dinosaurs would have on our everyday lives, and that the climax of the film took place in a valley that was, in effect, the same as an island that was far away from civilization, no, I don't think that idea was taken all the way. Not to mention that the idea that dinosaurs can only survive in tropical environments is complete bullshit! We've known for God knows how long that dinosaurs can survive in cold weather, and there are several really good documentaries depicting them as such, like episode 5 of the original Walking with Dinosaurs. Hell, even the previous film depicts this with the Pyroraptor. The only justification I could give is that maybe since InGen's dinosaurs were cloned with frog DNA, they need humid tropical environments to properly thermoregulate. This would explain why the Rebirth Spinosaurus and Mosasaurus never ventured far enough to become a problem to the global oceans, even though the other Mosasaurus had no problem venturing all the way up to the Bering Sea. But the frog DNA would only apply to InGen's dinosaurs, not Biosyn's, as we're told in Dominion that they brought back pure genome dinosaurs like the Moros intrepidus. Now, Rebirth does mention that one of the other reasons that dinosaurs have become limited to the equator is because it has more oxygen. And while there's been some back and forth on the matter, the currently accepted scientific consensus is that the Earth had,
more or less,
the same amount of oxygen during the Mesozoic as it does now. Heck, even if there is a difference, it's likely so small that the dinosaurs could have adjusted in less than one of their lifetimes. I mean, humans are capable of surviving in mountainous regions where there's less oxygen, like the Himalayas or the Andes, the latter of which I've been to and come back fine. But let's assume for a moment that there was more oxygen during the Mesozoic era in the Jurassic universe. I wouldn't put it past InGen to have the ability to genetically modify the dinosaurs' respiratory systems accordingly, since they apparently also had them engineered with the same or similar blood types that a velociraptor could get a blood transfusion from a T-Rex. But even if InGen left the respiratory systems of the dinosaurs unchanged, they would have started dying out a long time ago on the islands because, guess what? Rebirth's claim about more oxygen at the equator is also bullshit. And unfortunately, because of this retcon, the chances that Rexy and the other Biosyn Valley dinosaurs, as well as Blue and Beta, are still alive is not very promising. Unless they were transported to a tropical region where they could hopefully live out the rest of their natural lives. Probably another f***ing island if I had to guess. Seriously, how many are there at this point? Nublar, Sorna, possibly the other islands of Las Cinco Muertes, the Manticore Island, the Sanctuary Island proposed in Fallen Kingdom, and Ile Saint-Hubert? That's all I can think of, but I wouldn't be surprised if there were more. Backing up a bit to scientific mistakes, I have to own up to one of my own. I will admit I was not as scientifically versed as I thought I was, at least in regards to why the size of the animals mattered in relation to their genes that prevent heart disease. We do know that other diseases like cancer are less prominent in large animals like whales and elephants, even though they theoretically should get cancer more often since they have more cells with the potential to go haywire and form malignant tumors. I recommend this video from Be Smart for more information, but the long and short of it is that a combination of factors like exposure to pollutants, diet and lack of proper exercise, and fewer copies of cancer-suppressing genes than larger animals have is why humans get diseases more often. That last factor is the most important one in this case, since Krebs does mention the gene that they're looking for from the large species they want to collect from. I've also since pieced together why they need to collect DNA if InGen already had the complete genomes to make the creatures in the first place. This film brings up numerous times that this movie's evil company, Parker Genetics, wants to patent the genes so that they can profit off of their medical applications. And as Ian Malcolm says in the first film and Peter Ludlow in the second, InGen patented their dinosaurs. By the current point in the film canon, InGen was acquired by Parkergenics, presumably from Masrani Global after the debacles of the last few movies, which would have included the patents InGen placed on the genes that they used to create their lab-grown animal assets. However, patents for genes only last 20 years, and this could potentially explain the urgency of the mission to collect the DNA. Parkergenics wanted to patent the genes again before someone else, and needed samples from still living specimens in order to verify a source of the genes. This also lines up with the timeline because if the patents were about to or recently did expire, that means InGen would have had to have originally filed them sometime around 2005, the same year Jurassic World opened to the public. And they would have been experimenting with those genes for about 3 years on Ile Saint-Hubert before some dumbass dropped a Snickers wrapper and f***ed everything up. Which reminds me, this movie has a big presence of candy. The Snickers wrapper, the Altoids mints that Loomis crunches on, the licorice that Isabella feeds Dolores, and the candy shelf display in the convenience store that distracts a Mutodon. As for particular scenes that I really liked, there are 2 scenes that reminded me of the Jaws franchise. The Spinosaur and Mosasaur attack on the Delgado's sailboat reminded me of when the shark in Jaws 2 attacked the sailboats of the teenagers in that film. And the scene where Zora and co chase after the Mosasaur and get the sample from it reminded me of the first Jaws movie when Quint shot the shark with harpoons tied to yellow barrels. It's such a nice nod to classic Spielberg. The scene with the Titanosaurus was probably my favorite in the entire film, and the use of the original Jurassic Park theme, there could not have been a more appropriate time to use it. It just made the scene perfect. And the river raft scene was pretty tense. Yeah, most of it was spoiled in the marketing, but at least it treats the T-Rex with respect. The Jurassic movies have never failed to have at least one memorable scene involving the T-Rex, though it definitely can't top any of the T-Rex scenes from the first 2 movies. And I'm not sure if it was just the Gareth Edwards style of filming or anything to do with the genetics of how it was created, but the Rebirth T-Rex looked massive, maybe bigger than Rexy. I liked the large scales on the back of its lower jaw, which resemble the subtympanic scales of iguanas. The yellow stripes of its skin pattern also look great and give it a really distinct appearance from the other T-Rexes. But I think they should have made the stripes reddish-brown since that's how the T-Rex was described in the first novel. I mean, it would have made the scene more faithful to one of the book's most iconic moments. Oh, but one error that I do want to point out, when the Delgado family starts paddling and the T-Rex notices them, the entire shed and pier are completely gone. I also wish the T-Rex had at least one other scene. I'm not saying the movie should have been as T-Rex dependent as The Lost World, even though that would be awesome again, but at least one other appearance. Like maybe showing it during the flashback when the lab broke down and how the Distortus Rex caused it and the other dinosaurs to get loose too. That could have also been an opportunity to show the T-Rex being a serious threat, so that we'd be even more scared for the Delgado family later. The same could also have been done for the Velociraptors because, oh, do I have some shit to say about them. What has become my favorite Velociraptor design in the entire franchise, or at least tied with the Lost World Raptors, and its only appearance in the movie isn't even in full view because it's blurry and at night. I get the scene wanted to show the Mutodons to build them up as a threat, but it was just such a waste of what was this franchise's second most iconic species. And as cool as the Mutodons were, they didn't have anything to offer besides flight that was different from the Velociraptors that they were replacing. And even that I don't think was properly utilized because I think they should have had a scene where flight would have been necessary for the Mutodons to chase after the humans and further up their fear factor because then the humans can't even escape from the sky. Like maybe they could have been the ones to attack the helicopter instead of the D-Rex. And the sameness to the Velociraptors isn't helped by the fact that they recreate the kitchen scene from the first movie, but in a convenience store. Of the other returning species, Ankylosaurus only got a cameo when Krebs had to drive around it while trying to escape with the DNA, and it was just the boring Jurassic World version, which is not as good as the JP3 one in my opinion. The blue and gray Parasaurolophus from Dominion returns, my favorite design of that creature, but only as a carcass being scavenged on by Dilophosaurus, also in its Dominion design. Triceratops, another staple of the Jurassic movies, didn't even appear in the flesh at all, and might only be in the movie on a technicality because of its skull design in the Neo-Jurassic exhibit. Right before that scene, though, we do see one of the last living mainland dinosaurs, a dying Apatosaurus, which retains its design from the previous 3 films, and was in such a sorry state that someone even drew graffiti on it. To talk about a species with more substance, the Quetzalcoatlus I also had to come up with a continuity theory for. since we see a skeleton of it at the Neo-Jurassic Museum as well, with the same beak crest design as the one on Ile Saint-Hubert. Even though, as I said, we already know what the real Quetzalcoatlus in this universe looked like. As mentioned previously, Biosyn was capable of bringing back creatures with pure genomes, while InGen still relied on gap-filling methods with modern animals like frogs and monitor lizards in the case of Blue. But neither of InGen's parks had the Quetzalcoatlus, so that raises the question of how the museum got the skeleton of this iteration of the creature. The real answer is that this film's creative team didn't give a shit and expect us to accept this as Quetzalcoatlus as if this is the first time we've ever seen it. I'm cursing a lot in this video today, I'm sorry. I swear, I'm not that upset about this movie. But I suppose one could easily say that someone poached this specimen from Hubert and brought it to the mainland. Maybe that's a little far-fetched, given how the film says that the island is so dangerous that no one's dumb enough to even go there, but there could be other plausible explanations in that same vein as well. Dolores the Aqualops was really cute, even if she is very similar to the already existing Microceratus. But I'd be very concerned with Isabella taking it back to the mainland, given the retcon about the dinosaurs' inability to survive there. And it's kind of funny that Isabella started out saying that she wishes that the dinosaurs had never been brought back, but by the end of the film, she takes one home as a pet. There are also a couple of cameo species like some kind of temnospondyle amphibian that appears twice, a green Anuognathus, some unknown serpentine creature in the swamp, and in Suriname we see a tiny version of the Lost World Pteranodon in a birdcage, the jaws of a megalodon, and the severed head of a Dunkleosteus. Those last two definitely weren't archosaurs like the dinosaurs and pterosaurs, so they shouldn't be subject to the exclusionary rule set up by this movie, or at least not for the same reasons, as the oxygen issue for them is more dependent on what's dissolved in the sea, not what's in the atmosphere. As far as potential for sequels, this film doesn't leave much in the way of unresolved plot threads like Jurassic World 1 and Fallen Kingdom did. All of the sympathetic human characters survived, they got the DNA to create open source heart disease treatment, and if dinosaurs on the mainland are irrelevant, I don't see a reason for them to go back to Ile Saint-Hubert. I would totally be down for a Gareth Edwards Jurassic World trilogy, and I'm sure some of the actors wouldn't mind reprising their roles, especially Scarlett Johansson, but it's going to be hard to justify the Return to Dino Island trope 2 more times, given this film's retcon. Unless they retcon it again so that dinosaurs can exist on the mainland regardless of oxygen content or climate. The film does also throw disease into the list of credits for dinosaur decline, so maybe that detail could be latched onto as the basis for another concept. Perhaps, and this is just my suggestion/headcanon, they could say that the climate and oxygen excuse was just a cover-up for the work of some secret disease created by one of the world's governments that was unleashed to kill the dinosaurs. But the pathogen can't survive in tropical climates, thereby explaining how dinosaurs there were spared. There's even some precedent for this in the novels, as there's a disease called DX that led to the collapse of the dinosaur population on Isla Sorna. Now, in the Lost World book, DX was a prion disease. What is a prion, you may be asking? Well, it's just a misfolded protein that can cause other proteins to become misfolded into a cascading effect that can break down the tissues of entire organs. If you've ever heard of bovine spongiform encephalopathy, aka mad cow disease, that's caused by a prion, as is scrapie in sheep and chronic wasting disease in deer. And they're incurable simply because prions, like viruses, aren't alive, so they can't be eradicated by antibiotics like bacteria or fungal infections can. Oh, and have fun sleeping tonight knowing that prion diseases can happen in humans too. If DX were adapted into the movies, they could potentially change it to be a virus and just keep the DX name. And it would make the concept easier for audiences to grasp, given that in recent years, we had to contend with a virus in real life. Maybe I'm just grasping at straws here, but I really want them to reinstate dinosaurs on the mainland. No disrespect to David Koepp, but it's clear that a change in creative team can lead to some misunderstandings about what previous artists were trying to convey. I get that we all have our own ideas for how to push a narrative forward, but we shouldn't try to undo the work of others just to make room for one story. Looking at you, Rian Johnson of The Last Jedi. Heck, given that the existence of Ile Saint-Hubert doesn't contradict anything, they could have just kept the dinosaurs on the mainland alive and just said that the Hubert ones were special because only they have the heart disease-resistant genes. It's such a simple change that I don't understand why David Koepp had to throw the baby out with the bathwater, or that he thinks that he's only capable of writing stories about dinosaurs if they're on islands. He was the one who wrote the third act of The Lost World Jurassic Park, where a T-Rex was set loose on San Diego. And if someone like me can simply notice the difference between two creative trajectories, Kep should be the one to know how to not conflict with it. When the first Jurassic World released, it may not have directly acknowledged The Lost World and JP3, but it didn't undo their changes. It retained what the previous trilogy had done and expanded upon it to ask, what would happen if John Hammond's dream of a dinosaur theme park was real and operational? And then by the end of that trilogy, the status quo was changed to where it wasn't about the theme parks anymore. The question became, how is the world going to operate with dinosaurs now living in it? But then Rebirth came along and said that question didn't matter because they'd all die off anyway. It also makes the plot of The Lost World, again, a movie that David Kep wrote, look stupid because if dinosaurs can't survive on the mainland, what was the point of Peter Ludlow trying to open up a Jurassic Park in San Diego? As much as I hate what this film did in the first 5 minutes, and as much as I know I'm not the only one with this very valid complaint, I still don't think the rest of the movie is that bad. The cast and crew clearly respect the original Jurassic Park, and I think they're capable of telling a great story that adds to its legacy. But I also think that under the deadline that they had to make this movie, they were forced to make compromises. The development time for this movie was about a year and a half, maybe 2 years tops, and Universal needed a director who was okay with not making any significant changes to the script that Kep had already written. And I think if this movie had an extra year to refine the script and let Gareth Edwards have more creative input, I feel like they would have gotten rid of the mainland dinosaur die-off, and maybe the movie could have been about a globe-trotting adventure. I know Dominion was also like that, but I wouldn't have minded it again. So now that I've been going on about this movie for what has to be like 20 or 30 minutes at this point, I feel like I shouldn't keep you guys waiting on my verdict any longer. I'd say 6.5 out of 10 seems fair enough. The actors and visuals are great, and while the plot leaves a bit to be desired, future films can potentially turn things around and fix the mistakes of this one. Anyway, feel free to let me know in the comments. What did you think of Jurassic World Rebirth? I don't see myself doing any more Jurassic videos until the next movie comes out, especially with how many tangents I went on here, but I still might find some other way of talking about prehistoric fauna in my other types of videos, or maybe doing some one-offs down the line. And if you want to follow me outside of my videos, you can join my Discord server or follow me on Twitter. Links to both will be in the description. With all that said, I hope you enjoyed, have a nice day, and thank you for your time.